Chapter 141, Rebellion King Embryo 5. At that moment, Catalina shouted behind his back. Despite the fact that he was on the verge of life and death, Young-ho blinked before he knew it. Catalina hugged his back tightly. It wasn't just because she witnessed his fight with Baphomet. She thought if she didn't do it now, she could never do it. Burying her head again, she shouted again, "I really like you." Her feelings were conveyed to him through Brigada. It was a more intense and pure expression of her affection for him than any of her words. Young-ho's face turned red. Salami screamed about her confession amid the fighting, but she didn't care. Young-ho now felt Catalina's thoughts and feelings. He felt as if his heart was bursting. His will to live was overflowing now. Desire Ayaman's voice reached him, and he also shouted at Ayaman. He desired while being grateful to his simple-mindedness. He desired and desired. "I'll survive. I'll surely survive. Let me win by all means. Oh, oh, oh." The mana of greed exploded. He brought Skathak's life from his godly energy. He finally penetrated the link to Skathak, which he couldn't because of insufficient power. It seemed that he could hear her voice, who must be in the labyrinth of greed. Life overwhelmed death. It didn't stop offsetting it, but destroyed it. Despite Bone Dragon's enormous mana, the breath weapon collapsed. Salami spread its wings of flames and sped up again. Catalina hugged Young-ho's waist even tighter. Arman roared. A fatal blow. Lance charging penetrated the breath weapon. Without slowing down the momentum, Arman penetrated into Bone Dragon's mouth. The vortex of life from the huge spear toward death. And it finally reached the center of Bone Dragon, where there must be Bone Dragon's heart. A mass of powerful mana when it was alive. Greed shouted. The greed arising from Young-ho's whole body was exactly divided in two. One wrapped up Catalina, and the other wrapped around the center of mana. The spear made of black mana was dismantled. The watery blue energy of life exploded and opened the way again. What was left now was the green flames of pure greed. Greed led the way. Even at the moment when he penetrated Bone Dragon like an arrow, Young-ho cut through the center of mana with Ayaman. What happened next was Salamis' forceful advance. Finally, Salami penetrated through Bone Dragon. Catalina looked behind her back, blushing. She witnessed Bone Dragon shattering in the air. Young-ho didn't hesitate. He ignored the common sense of the demon world that the living shouldn't absorb the essence of the undead, contaminated with the energy of death. Greed. It was one of the 7 deadly sins. The green flames swallowed the essence of Bone Dragon and its power. Young-ho also couldn't help but look at the spectacular scene. The red breath weapon shattered in the sky. The huge spear engulfed in the green flames penetrated Bone Dragon. The explosion that shook the sky, and the loudness and splendor that reminded one of thunder and lightning. Salami left the traces of flames in the sky. It slipped out of the bones of Bone Dragon and drew a new trajectory once again. The bones of Bone Dragon poured down from the sky, because the power of death that made Bone Dragon exist as an undead was destroyed by Skathak's force of life. Those who watched Bone Dragons fighting, shouting with joy, were so embarrassed, they were so shocked to watch the huge 12 meters long being shattered into pieces. Embryo was as embarrassed and shocked as them. Grabbing Kaiwan's neck, Embryo raised his head before he knew it. He couldn't take his eyes off the sky even though he could break her neck with a little more push. Kaiwan smiled slightly. She was covered with wounds. When Young-ho was engaged in a fierce battle with Bone Dragon in the air, another fight was going on intensely on the ground. Despite the fact that her specialty was defense, like she said, she was thoroughly abused by Embryo. Embryo had something similar to Young-ho, but he was different. His pressing down on Kaiwan with overwhelming mana was the same as Young-ho, but he was different in terms of its delicacy and sophistication. It was literally impossible to do something about Embryo. He read not only Kaiwan's attack, but also her every move. He read even the power of distortion early on, and dealt with it. Blood flowed from her lips. She was hit only twice, but the blow was big. Her right shoulder was smashed, so she couldn't move, and the color of her abdomen exposed to his attack terribly changed. She quickly reduced the shock with the power of distortion, but her internal organs were messed up with a little shock. However, Kaiwan didn't lose her fighting spirit. She still had her left arm and 2 legs, so she could fight as much as she could, indifferent from you. she barely said, with her neck held by Embryo. Embryo, who was chasing the traces of the red wings, rolled his eyes at her feeble voice. Even though her eyes were half closed, she still looked at Embryo ferociously. Their fighting lasted only shortly, but Kaiwan already sized him up. Embryo's mana was familiar to Kaiwan himself. We have the blood of the great house of Mammon flowing through our body, but that's it. Mammon's blood was flowing in Embryo's body. Nobody knew the reason. Over 1,000 years was never a short time, even in the demon world. Maybe Embryo was a remote relative of Mammon, or he might not know he shared the blood of the house of Mammon. Embryo's eyes were cold. However, Kaiwan didn't miss the agitation hidden in his cold eyes. Kaiwan didn't know how the fight would end up. That was why she had to raise the odds of Yongho's chance of winning a little more. Kaiwan was thinking of infuriating Embryo. So, she made a terrible smile. She never showed it before Yongho, but she now showed the most ferocious smile at Embryo, which she used to show at those who insulted and despised the house of Mammon. Her smile contained sarcasm on her viper-like lips. Kneel down and respect and welcome the king of greed. From Kaiwan's point of view, she didn't expect much when she said that. She just wanted to keep insulting him to break his composure. Contrary to her intention, her words got on his nerves from the beginning. Embryo's eyes trembled. He couldn't hide his agitation anymore. Even at that moment, Embryo looked back at the sky. It was his instinctive movement. Not only Embryo, but everyone on the battlefield did so. Bone Dragon was no longer in the sky. The traces of the flames that Salamis' wings left behind were beautiful, but they weren't strong enough to draw attention from everyone on the battlefield. Nonetheless, everyone looked at the sky. Those who were sensitive to mana felt more pressure. Embryo opened his lips. Kaiwan smiled slightly. Bone Dragon's mana wasn't scattered. Its essence that the living couldn't even absorb because it was contaminated with the energy of death burned in the green flames, which looked too small. The master of the house of Mammon, the demon king of flames, swallowed the essence of Bone Dragon. It was stupid. It was like swallowing poison, but the master didn't collapse. There was no painful scream from him, the release of a huge mana, a vortex of intense mana that shook the surrounding area. The sin of greed, Embryo said, as if he sighed. At that moment, Kaiwan wrapped the power of distortion around her neck and bounced off Embryo's hand. Kaiwan fell down to the floor. Embryo quickly turned his head. Instead of praising their king, Eligos and Ophelia kicked off the ground again, feeling their mana growing, and the sun of the green flames rose again. Yongho, who drastically shortened the time required for concentrating mana by almost fully releasing the absorbed essence of Bone Dragon, looked down on the ground. 5 towering horns on his head shook. Salami headed back to the ground with its wings of flames. Embryo's army had experienced this kind of stuff before, so they were agitated. They tried to run away with a screech. Kaiwan smiled. Embryo knew he couldn't even use her as a shield against Yongho. Surprisingly, the green flames of the master of the house of Mammon could distinguish between friendly forces and enemies. Therefore, Embryo decided to face the disaster proudly. He erected 5 horns and released mana. He also activated his power. Bang Yongho swung Aemon. The sun of the green flames hit the ground once again. It destroyed Embryo's main unit, and once again recreated the map of hell on the ground. Yongho closed his eyes for a moment. He felt the mana transmitted through Brigada. He briefly found out the condition of his dungeon spirits, engaged in the intense fighting. Skull was still fighting the Death Knight with all its might. Eligos and Ophelia smashed Embryo's main unit amid the green flames, commanding Skull's unit instead of Skull. Tigrius destroyed Embryo's forces in the right wing. Yongho opened his eyes again. Catalina let go of her hands around his waist. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't intervene in his fight with Embryo. What she had to do now was to save more soldiers of the Free City fighting under Aros' command. Standing on Salamis' back, Yongho looked at Catalina. She laughed vigorously, flapping her red-hot ears. Yongho kicked Salami in the back. Catalina also flew, spreading her wings of black mana. The two flew in different directions. Embryo shouting at him, Yongho landed on the ground. The green flames flaring up all over the place were split automatically, making way for Yongho, and the green flames exploded not far from Embryo. Powerful mana crushed the green flames. but Yong-ho focused on his consciousness. He read Embryo's mana in the air. He wasn't just content with seeing it. He predicted its trajectory. Bang Amon clashed with an unknown huge spear. Yong-ho and Embryo looked at each other beyond their weapons. Each other's mana clashed in the air and exploded. Chapter 123, Rebellion, King Embryo 6. The two pushed each other away. They distanced themselves from each other as soon as they clashed, and they took the same tactics almost simultaneously. It was to increase the intensity of their mana in the surrounding area. Yong-ho and Embryo realized it instinctively. They could read the flow of each other's mana, so they increased the concentration of mana to delay the other party reading the trajectory of the attack with the help of the flow of mana. Embryo stepped forward. But at that moment, someone intervened in the battle between the two demon kings. With a thunderous screech, Elagos punched Embryo like lightning. It was a perfect surprise attack. Yong-ho and Embryo were so conscious of each other that they couldn't pay attention to others. Embryo quickly twisted his upper body, but Elagos punched Embryo's left arm immediately. Even with that attack alone, his left arm was torn out. Elagos smiled. Embryo's left arm, which had been torn off, was fluttering in the air. Then Elagos broke the floor with his fist. Then Embryo stepped forward and threw a punch in Elagos' chest with his left arm. Then he came up with the penetration strike to put all his mana into the opponent's body. With a thunderous noise, Elagos' massive body rose slightly upward. Soon he collapsed, gushing blood. Embryo shook his upper body just like he did when he confronted Elagos. Ophelia rushed toward Embryo and attacked Embryo's thigh hard with a turning kick. Her sharp kick cut his left leg like a beast's teeth. But Embryo moved ahead again. Stepping on the ground with his left foot, Embryo stretched out his arms. Then he mounted a penetration strike into Ophelia's abdomen, who stopped momentarily because of embarrassment. Bang! Yong-ho stepped forward strongly. As if he was doing lance charging, he charged at Embryo, pointing Amon upright. Ophelia collapsed, throwing out blood and pieces of intestines. In terrible pain, she understood what Embryo's real power was. She kept thinking, hoping that Yong-ho would also discover it. The Demon King of Wolves. It was just his nickname. It wasn't the name Embryo had as a true Demon King. Embryo's real power was regeneration. It was his super speed ability to regenerate, which was fast and strong enough to recall immortality. It wasn't because Embryo avoided Yong-ho's attack that he twisted his body after releasing that power. In fact, the purpose of his action was to minimize the shaking of his body in the aftermath of Elagos and Ophelia's attack. In other words, he immediately penetrated into the opponent's body for a counterattack right after being attacked. He did the same this time. That was why Embryo confronted Yong-ho's attack from the front. Yong-ho stabbed into the air, not Embryo. It caused a strong wave of the green flames and engulfed Embryo. Ophelia's intention was passed on to Yong-ho, so he was convinced of what he saw. Embryo's ability to regenerate was real, not tricky. Super ha 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 ha. Embryo jumped over the waves of the green flames. Although he was wounded by the heat of the ultra-high temperature, he didn't care. By the time he passed through the flames, his wounds already regenerated. Thanks to the powerful magic field around his body, he had no fatal injuries. The huge spear in Embryo's right hand stabbed into the air. His action was completely different from it when he fought Kaiwan. All his movements were optimized only for his attack. It was an extreme move that neglected his own defense. He was faster and more powerful. Yong-ho, who managed to get out of it by kicking the ground, grabbed Amon. Then he stretched out Amon toward Embryo, who was advancing again to get him. But Embryo didn't avoid the attack. Rather, he didn't defend it. Amon pierced Embryo's abdomen. Embryo groaned in pain, but he didn't collapse. Rather, he took a step forward. Yong-ho quickly released Amon from his hand. But it was already late. Likewise, Embryo's right palm, who abandoned the huge spear, touched him. It was the so-called penetration strike. Embryo's mighty mana began to spread with terrifying momentum. Yong-ho bounced off randomly. It was no exaggeration to say that he was thrown out almost a dozen meters or more. This was something abnormal that he never expected. Embryo's penetration strike was a skill to destroy the opponent by pouring mana into his body. It was far from a technique to push the enemy out. Yong-ho rolled on the floor. Clenching his teeth, Embryo pulled out Amon from his abdomen. his penetration strike failed. It was true that he touched Yong-ho for the penetration strike and released all his mana, but that was it. Putting up with pain, Yong-ho raised himself up. His tattered left arm, covered with wounds, drooped. The moment Embryo turned to the penetration strike, Yong-ho moved his left hand. It was impossible for Yong-ho to clearly pinpoint Embryo's target, so it was almost a miracle that he could avoid it. Fortunately, Embryo's attack was straight and linear. Embryo touched Yong-ho's left hand. At that moment, Yong-ho activated the Ring of Distortion and blocked his penetration strike with the Shield of Distortion. The reason why Yong-ho bounced back was because the penetration strike couldn't get into his body and only bounced off the Shield of Distortion. But Yong-ho's defense was incomplete. Above all, he activated the Shield of Distortion too quickly. Although he managed to block the mana of the penetration strike, he could not block it completely. Even though he was exposed to just a little bit of Embryo's mana, his left arm was in tatters. Probably he couldn't use his left arm during this battle. On the other hand, Embryo was still well and strong. Although his whole body was burned by the flames of the Red Lotus while he was separating almond from his hand, Embryo wasn't wounded. As soon as he pulled almond out, he recovered his body in an instant, as if he was going against time. Yong-ho stared at Embryo and thought about his power. If his regeneration ability was his real power, he would never be truly immortal. Mana only now could Yong-ho realize what it was. Embryo increased the concentration of mana that he was releasing around him, but he couldn't hide the flow of mana completely. His mana was being consumed for regeneration. That meant that there was clearly a limit to his regeneration ability as well. What should Yong-ho do now? Should he keep attacking Embryo until his mana run out? But Embryo didn't let Yong-ho buy time. Yong-ho concentrated his consciousness. Instead of reading his mana, Yong-ho tried to read Embryo's movements. He felt a sharp pain in his left arm again, but tried his best to put up with it. Embryo's right hand stabbed into the air. Embryo's weapon wasn't just the penetration strike. He had powerful mana based on the 5 horns, a stocky body, and superhuman patience and will to endure even the pain of his whole body being burned. Yong-ho barely managed to avoid Embryo's right hand. However, his action was a trick to make Yong-ho avoid it. Embryo's real attack came from his left hand, and Yong-ho also saw it. Embryo wasn't the only one who set the trap. Yong-ho grabbed the air. Then the flames of the Red Lotus arose. Almond, which Embryo had thrown on the floor, rose from Yong-ho's right hand. Embryo couldn't respond properly to Almond's sudden appearance. He couldn't even use the secret weapon he had prepared for this battle when he was dealt. A strong blow by Yong-ho, Amon again pierced Embryo's abdomen. Yong-ho held his breath. Instead of screaming, he poured magic into Amon. The violent green flames arose roughly, burning Embryo's body from the inside. But Yong-ho didn't stop. He saw Embryo regenerating his body and collapsing amid the green flames. Embryo was gathering mana. Even in terrible pain, he raised his arm and grabbed Amon, which showed truly his astonishing will. Embryo stared at Yong-ho while suffering from pain beyond imagination. Not content with grabbing Amon, he took steps to narrow the distance with Yong-ho. Then Yong-ho once again poured out mana. Embryo's body burned again. Thanks to the enormous power of mana, Yong-ho could notice Embryo's bare bones, and Embryo took it as an opportunity. He delayed recovering his abdomen so he could get out of Amon. Even amid the pain of his hair turning white because of the intense heat, Embryo finally created a moment of counterattack. Yong-ho saw Embryo, so did Embryo. Bang! At that moment, Embryo's right arm was bitten by something. It was Kaiwan's whip sword that snatched it like a viper. Ah ha! Kaiwan let out a screech. Then she pulled Embryo's whole body with her left arm, just like she did to Yong-ho on the 10th floor. She struck Embryo on the floor by swinging her whip sword violently. She held him only for a moment. She couldn't hold him for long because her injuries were so severe that she found her left arm already losing strength. But that was enough. Time was made. Embryo regained freedom from Kaiwan by cutting off his right arm wrapped in the whip sword. Instead of attacking Kaiwan, who fell, exhausted and bloody, he grabbed the magic spear he created with mana. Then he ran into Yong-ho again. Yong-ho confronted him now. Appreciating Kaiwan's help, he rushed toward Embryo. During the time Kaiwan created, Yong-ho kept pondering over how to defeat Embryo. Yong-ho and Embryo clashed. Embryo aimed at Yong-ho's immovable left arm. Yong-ho also stabbed him with Aemon. This time both attacked each other without thinking about their own defense. They crossed each other. Embryo was a little faster in attacking. He pierced Yong-ho's left shoulder with the magic spear. But it lasted only a moment. Yong-ho didn't stop. Enduring the pain, he stretched out his right arm. He stabbed Embryo's chest with the magic spear of the Red Lotus, Aemon, and created the green flames of greed. They repeated the same attacks several times. Embryo activated the power of regeneration and at the same time focused on the magic spear. He wanted to release mana through the tip of the spear. But he did it differently now. Chapter 133, Rebellion King Embryo 7. Embryo, who was trying to heal his wounds by using his power, felt his power disintegrating death. A dark purple light flashed from the magic field in Yong-ho's left arm. The terrible power of death ate away Embryo's power. It was also excessive for Yong-ho. Skathak's life and Baphomet's death were different. The mana of death, raging insanely, pushed its blade into not only Embryo but also Yong-ho. Moreover, Embryo didn't give up before the mana of death. He turned all the mana he was trying to exhale to Yong-ho toward Aemon. He resisted the mana of death while empowering the power of regeneration that was constantly diminishing. Embryo showed a truly thrillsome will, but Yong-ho didn't care. The driving force of Embryo's strong will wasn't important to him. What really mattered was that he had to destroy Embryo at this moment. Embryo's mana clashed against Yong-ho's mana violently. This type of fight was new to Yong-ho. It could be called a showdown between the two men's pure mana. Embryo was a little stronger when it came to mana itself. Because of the energy of death, Yong-ho didn't fully absorb the Bone Dragon's mana. Moreover, he used too much mana when he released the Force of Life. Yong-ho drew mana from Brigada and didn't stop there. He hoped more than that to destroy Embryo. Yong-ho took the power of mana greedily. The power of combination magic, dungeon spirit, Tigrius power, as the master of the house, although the power of his soul was weakened, he still had it. Greed brought it out. Yong-ho screamed in extreme pain as if his head was breaking. He added a new light to the magic field emitting purple light. Skathak's life was back in strong motion. To bring it out, Yong-ho consumed not only his mana, but also his own force of life. He triggered the power of combination while staring at Embryo, astonished by his new power. It was a mess. It was the power of combination that he couldn't properly control in the first place. But that was enough. Skathak's life and Baphomet's death didn't cancel out. The two different forces repelled each other strongly and finally exploded. Death swallowed up Embryo's power. The explosion caused by the opposite power of the two blew away Embryo's magic. Embryo screamed. Yong-ho roared once again. The green flames of greed surged from Aemon, the magic spear of the Red Lotus. Yong-ho's knees were broken helplessly. He couldn't hold up anymore and flopped down. He was breathing roughly. He felt like his heart was bursting, and his hand holding Aemon trembled violently. His mana ran out. He could no longer endure the pain. If he could, he wanted to collapse and faint right away. However, he once again clenched his teeth and looked straight ahead. Embryo was down, with his whole body covered in blood. Yong-ho didn't know how he was wounded. Unlike Yong-ho himself, Embryo still had mana, but Embryo didn't activate the power of regeneration. He barely breathed out occasionally. Yong-ho felt that Catalina was running toward him. Salami, which dared not to intervene in the fierce battle, flew down and landed on the ground to protect its defenseless master. Yong-ho caught his breath. He raised his upper body while falling forward and clenched his teeth. Although he took the Bone Dragon's mana too quickly, it was definitely a driving force for his growth. Moreover, his evolution, EXP, had maxed out thanks to this fight. So, he had to stand up. He shouldn't lose consciousness yet. He had to share Catalina's mana to activate the power of evolution. There were still the remnants of Embryo's troops in the house of Randalt and in the rear. The fight between Skull and the Death Knight was also not over. Yong-ho stood up. He stumbled, but he finally stepped forward. Watching him, Embryo's hands trembled. The two faced each other again. Salami stood by Yong-ho's side. Catalina's black mana was gradually transferred to Yong-ho through Brigada. And at that moment, Embryo sprang to his feet. He passed by Yong-ho, who flinched because he couldn't react instantly. Then Embryo poured all his remaining mana into the ground. Yong-ho flopped down again. Salami stood between the two. Embryo's last attack didn't miss. The black demon watcher, who was leaning out of the ground halfway, was killed when his heart burst. It was because Embryo activated the secret magic from the day he encountered the watcher. Yong-ho couldn't understand the situation, but he realized it instinctively. Instead of attacking himself with the remaining mana, Embryo attacked the demon soaring from the ground. Embryo, who fell on the watcher's body, closed his eyes. He couldn't see anymore. Now his mana ran out completely. He had no sign of recovering. Embryo smiled faintly, then squeezed his voice and said, "King of Greed, you're back." Actually, Embryo had been longing for his return throughout his life. He didn't want to tell his story in detail, nor did he want to persuade the King of Greed to understand him. He continued, "Hide your greed. Beware of the King of Gluttony." The Watcher was killed, but nobody knew there might be another Watcher. Even if it wasn't true, the King of Gluttony would soon infer the situation. Embryo's hearing, as well as sight, were paralyzed. Even his pain became dull. He didn't question his own action. Maybe he projected his wishes and unfulfilled dreams onto the new King of Greed. "King of Greed," Embryo said for the last time. With a faint smile, he died. Embryo's army scattered in all directions and fled. Rikum, who fought fiercely in the dungeon of the House of Randolt, didn't know the situation of the battle. He simply flopped down on the floor, content with the fact that the battle was over. Tigrius, who not only helped Skull fight the Death Knight, but also Embryo's troops in the right wing, was also exhausted. He was pretty much exhausted, but the old gentleman didn't flop down. He rode his horse to command the surviving Free City troops. Skull's armor was shattered again. Claymore was also so badly damaged that Skull could never use it again. However, Skull grabbed the half-broken Death Knight's skull with his hand. Only after getting to Yong-ho, it rolled on the floor. As if to reassure him, Skull said in a dying voice, even though it was already dead, "Skull, Skull." Eligos fainted. Ophelia, leaning over Eligos, gave a grunt of pain. Since both of them were strong red demons, they could survive. Otherwise, they would have lost their lives by Embryo's penetration strike. Catalina, who transferred all her mana to Yong-ho, drooped on Salami's back, and she was satisfied with the current situation. She hasn't heard Yong-ho's answer to her confession, but she felt happy that she confessed and that he survived. What a mess. Squatting on the floor, Kaiwan spoke. She stretched her legs, leaning against some monster, not knowing whether it was an orc or not. She looked terrible, but at the same time, she looked pretty comfortable. Yong-ho squatted in front of Kaiwan. Thanks to Catalina sharing mana with him, he could barely move around. If he used mana again, it was certain that he would lose his strength completely, so he put off using the power of evolution later. He also decided to think about Embryo's last words and actions later. "Thanks, Kaiwan." His short compliment contained his genuine and deep appreciation. He really thanked Kaiwan. Without her help, it would have been Embryo, not him, who was here. "You're welcome. I had a very pleasant vacation thanks to you. I feel like I'm alive after a long time," she replied with a bright smile. He felt it before, but her smile was really charming. Moreover, the fact that she made such a smile at him alone was even more revealing. Alien mana was circulating around Kaiwan's body. It was none other than Gusion's mana, not anyone else's. "I think I used too much mana. I'm sorry, but I need to return early. I think, if I don't go now, I might die soon. Let me go and get some treatment." Kaiwan was a dungeon spirit in the arena. Until the new owner of the arena appeared, the fate of her life and death was left with the arena. Yong-ho nodded. "Next time, I'll get you discharged from there, not just vacation. Let's eat a lot of delicious things again." "That's great. I look forward to it." Kaiwan leaned down. Gusian's mana grew stronger and stronger. Yong-ho Chung Kaiwan called him again. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, then rolled her eyes and said, "It's my wish. Don't move and stay still. Don't even answer." At that moment, Catalina pricked her ears. Salami felt something ominous. Yong-ho remained still as she requested, and she moved his body with a grunt. She wrapped his face with both hands and gently kissed his lips. Her kiss was short but very intense. It was different from when he kissed Ophelia. Hehehe, Chwiryong laughed in a silly manner, which didn't fit her at all. After touching his cheek, who hardened like a stone statue, she winked at Catalina, who was shocked in fear. She winked at Catalina again and said with a smile, "See you later." Chwiryong's mana enveloped Chwiryong and disappeared with her. Salami shook its head as if it shouldn't have seen them. Catalina was drooping on Salami's back, just like wet laundry. She was about to cry now. Watching them all, Skull laughed heartily. Then it shouted once again for Yong-ho, who was overcome with deep emotions at the victory. Skull, the battle was over. It was a victory for the House of Mammon. Chapter 144, Homecoming 1. The southern and northern parts of the demon world were hugely different, like night and day. Unlike the southern area called an abandoned land, the northern part always played an important role in the history of demons. First, the land there was fertile. Even without special magical measures, they could do farming without any problem. There were rich underground resources, and transportation of goods on sea routes was brisk, thanks to the 3 rivers that led to the deep sea, one of the 3 major seas of the demon world. However, it wasn't because of this alone that the northern part was called the Blessed Land. That was not the most important reason. There was a powerful flow of mana in the north, since it was more powerful than any other area of the demon world. Some even called it the Great Flow. Perhaps, thanks to the powerful flow of mana, those in the north were often superior to those in other regions within the same race. It was because some were born with more mana than others. Those in the north were strong, they lived longer, and even their reproduction rate was faster than that of those in other areas. And there was one family that had dominated the northern part for a long time. That family was very special. Even in the long history of the demon world, there was no other family that could pair with that family. Originally, the 7 deadly sins couldn't be inherited from generation to generation, regardless of the current kings, but also the previous ones. It was common that the house of the 7 deadly sins changed with the emergence of a new king, but this family was an exception. Since the 7 deadly sins emerged, this family had never lost the title as the sin of pride until now. The master of this house always reigned in the north as the king of pride of the day. Even before the great king of greed emerged thousands of years ago, his ancestors were the king of pride. Even now, more than 1,000 years later, they maintained that privilege. The dungeon of the king of pride was the oldest dungeon in the demon world. The weight of the accumulated years surpassed the labyrinth of greed. All those born and raised in the north grew up watching the dungeon of the king of pride. The king of pride was someone who reigned over the people. The first king of pride thought that looking down on the earth from the sky befitted him. Therefore, his dungeon was not built underground. Built on the ground, the dungeon stretched toward the sky. The Tower of Pride was the tallest skyscraper in the demon world. At that time, the king of pride was on the top floor of the skyscraper. In his place while facing the sky, he thought about the worldly affairs. He was young. Over 100 years had passed since he took over as the king. But since he was born with such a powerful mana, he had no sign of aging. He was tall, and his eyes were confident. He had gray hair and a strong build, with 3 eyes on his forehead. Wearing a pitch-black cloak adorned with black bird feathers, he grinned on the throne made of dozens of wings. He looked at the pieces on the chessboard again. The King of Fury was demonstrating force beyond the sea. But he didn't care. The King of Fury was the weakest of the 6 kings, contrary to popular rumors. That ridiculous peace-seeker wouldn't dare cross the sea. Like it or not, the King of Violence was a dragon. He was the guardian of the treasure. He usually crouched in his own nest, and he didn't bother to provoke a war first. The rest of the kings were like him. So, the King of Pride was convinced they wouldn't make the provocations. It was too long. A false peace under the name of balance was no longer needed. Now, he needed destruction for a new beginning. The King of Pride made up his mind. He exercised psychokinesis to move the pieces of the chessboard. It wasn't just the pieces that moved at that moment. The troops in the north crossed the border. He started a war. Young-ho's battle with Embryo was over. But it didn't mean the war was over. There were lots of things Young-ho had to take care of, everywhere. The immediate problem was how to handle the remnants of Embryo's army. Almost all those soldiers under Embryo's command survived and left the battlefield. The troops of the House of Mammon didn't even dare to chase them. Although they won, the damage was too great. Oros was killed, and more than 2/3 of the troops of the Free City who followed Oros were also killed, with only 200 surviving. Most of the Free City soldiers complained of extreme stress and fatigue. Therefore, it was impossible to have them pursue their enemies. Embryo soldiers dispersed in all directions. Most of them fled to the west, but there were quite a few who ran away deep into the south. Of course, nobody thought they would capture the dungeon of the House of Mammon or occupy the Free City. However, their existence itself was a headache for the south. It was necessary to subdue them sooner or later by defeating them or absorbing them into the south. Even Lotus, the demon king of wild animals, who accompanied Embryo on this battle, also survived and escaped. It was okay if he ran to the west or north, but if he penetrated into the south, it was a different issue. Lotus was the master of a house with power. He was far from an ordinary remnant. The northern and eastern regions were also troublesome. In the north, there were several housemasters who had surrendered to Embryo. Since they had been waiting in the north to stop the provocations by the east, it was difficult to judge how they would act after Embryo's defeat. Currently, the biggest source of trouble was those in the east. They initially tried to fish in troubled waters while Embryo was fighting with the House of Mammon. Now that Embryo was gone, it would be nothing strange if they attacked the south instead of the north. Of course, it was more likely that they would march into the ownerless north instead of attacking the south. This was the bigger problem in a sense. The immediate problems were more annoying and challenging. For example, problems such as the reorganization of the House of Randalt, the collection of the Bone Dragon's bones, the return to the House of Mammon, calming down the popular uneasiness in the Free City, and the restoration of dungeon spirits. Out of these headaches, the last one made it even more difficult for Yong-ho to handle things efficiently. Basically, he was short-handed for a lot of work. Half a day passed after the battle with Embryo was over. Yong-ho was perching on the bed of the Demon King's room in the deepest part of the House of Randalt. His outside wounds were healed thanks to another evolution through furthering physical strength. But that was it. His whole body ached, but he couldn't fall asleep easily. It wasn't just cosmetic problems that the House of Mammon faced today. What was the demon that Embryo defeated at the last minute? What did Embryo's will mean? Yong-ho didn't take Embryo's essence and that of the demon that surged from the ground, for they were totally destroyed. It seemed to be the effect of the magic that Embryo activated for the last time. Beware of the 6 kings. Watch out for the king of gluttony. Tigrius, the least injured among the dungeon spirits, couldn't give counsel to Yong-ho because he was so busy with taking care of the aftermath of the battle. Ophelia, who usually served as an advisor to Yong-ho whenever problems like this happened, was also a patient now. Yong-ho gave up asking for their advice. It seemed that the best policy, for now, was to take a rest. It was foolish to just worry because there were so many problems. Well, I took care of the bigger problems anyway. Actually, he was done with moving the wounded soldiers into the dungeon of the House of Randalt. Since most of the spaces of the house were fortified, most of the wounded soldiers had to lie down in the aisles or gathering places. But it was inevitable. Sure, that's the way I should do right now. Letting out a long breath, he turned his gaze to the side. He was faced with something he had to solve now. Catalina was sitting at the end of the bed quietly. Her long ears and tails were drooping on the floor. Even after the battle, she worked tirelessly until now. She was exhausted because she shared all her mana with Yong-ho. However, she might have another reason for letting her ears droop like that. He gulped before he knew it. The sound of him gulping was heard unusually loud. Yong-ho took a deep breath again. Even though he did so several times, he couldn't calm down his pounding heart. Rather, his heart was beating more rapidly now. So, he said, pretending to be calm as much as possible, Catalina. Yeah, master, she said, flinching a little bit, but she was looking down at the floor. He clenched his teeth, which was really bad for his heart. He felt like his face was blushing, but he had to speak. So he opened his mouth again, though stutteringly. I mean what you said to me during the battle. Catalina slowly turned her head and looked at him. Chapter 145. Homecoming, too. She was nervous, too. As if she was scared, her eyes were welled with big tears. He couldn't continue because his head was in a whirl at the moment. But she didn't wait indefinitely. Instead of biting her lips, she pricked her ears straight. Facing him directly, she said, "I was serious when I said that." That was how far she could say. Even without Brigada, and even without getting connected to the dungeon spirit, he could know her feelings. "So," he answered, "I like you too." In fact, Yong-ho thought of a lot of nice expressions about her, but that was all he could say calmly at the moment. He said again, "I mean, I like you." It looked like a basic answer that even an elementary boy could say, but Yong-ho didn't care. He saw her flapping her ears like wings after a long time. Despite her watery eyes, she couldn't hide her lifting the corner of her lips with joy. His heart was beating faster again. She pulled her buttocks slightly and approached him. "Master, I hope you can grant my wish, will you?" He never expected it, but he nodded immediately. Honestly, it was impossible for him to think rationally now. She let out a big breath, then swallowed and moved boldly. She narrowed her distance with him and said, seeing him face to face, "Please stay still. Don't even talk." At that moment, he was going to say, "Wait a minute," but stopped. He thought about what she just said, because he had heard it before, and several hours ago at that. Anyway, he stiffened like a piece of wood, and Catalina wrapped her cheeks with her trembling hands. Ophelia and Kaiwan did the same thing to him, and now Catalina was doing it. It seemed that he was born to be kissed rather than kiss somebody. Catalina gently closed her eyes. However, Yong-ho couldn't close his eyes. He couldn't take his eyes off her lips, getting closer to his lips little by little. "Ophelia, Endarian's daughter, is interfering with the master of the great house of Mammon. I'm really, really sorry, but it's too urgent for me, and I think this is the perfect time." Startled, Yong-ho turned his head toward the direction where the voice came from. Catalina was standing in the corner of the room, boasting of her best agility among the dungeon spirits. She erected her tail as if she was quite surprised. Ophelia, the owner of the voice, alternately looked at her and Yong-ho with mixed feelings and narrowed her eyes. Salami was shaking behind Ophelia's back for some reason. Clearing her throat once, Ophelia continued, "It's not something like the enemy's ambush. It's because of the bones and restored items of the bone dragon." She couldn't hide her fatigue when she said that. In fact, she was incapacitated after she was hit by Embryo during the battle. No matter how much she took the potion, it was irrational for her to stand before Yong-ho like this now. However, instead of falling and taking a break, Ophelia chose to move, clenching her teeth. She needed someone to take care of picking up the pieces after the battle. Even though Yong-ho and Catalina were busy with picking up the pieces after the battle, they weren't yet used to it. It might sound arrogant, but without Ophelia, it would have taken much more time for Yong-ho to clean up after the battle. Ophelia said, "Although I collected the ruins of the battlefield in one place, I don't have enough troops to guard and transport them. And it is not the right time for us to ask for additional troops from the Free City. So, I wish we could use the transport service of the dungeon market, although it was expensive. Besides, we need more medicine to treat the injured." The bones of the bone dragon were in themselves a great treasure. So, they shouldn't be neglected. Despite that, the ruins of the bones were scattered on the battlefield randomly. In the eyes of former merchant Ophelia, it looked like the gold nuggets were up for grabs on the street. Yong-ho couldn't answer right away. It wasn't because he didn't understand her request. Since he was busy cleaning up outside the dungeon until now, he knew well how badly the bones were neglected. The reason he agonized was because the House of Mammon had no cash reserve. The delivery service of the dungeon market was quite expensive, as Ophelia said. Like an excellent dungeon spirit, Ophelia read his mind and said, "You can pay for their service with some of the bones. I know it's too good to pay with the bones, but it's more urgent to safely move the bones of the bone dragon into the warehouse of the Mammon House, and to heal the wounded. I am sorry, but I would like you to approve it." Ophelia found one more value in the bones of the bone dragon. Who made the bone dragon? Who the hell gave the bone dragon to Embryo? The clue on that question could be found in the bones. There weren't so many individuals or groups with the ability to create undead monsters like the bone dragon. Such power was too strong for the master of a house in the abandoned southern land. The Death Knight and the bone dragon were two powerful dungeon spirits to be owned by the master of a house in the south. There must be somebody behind it. Be it an individual or a group, there was clearly a certain presence behind embryos. Back Yong-ho nodded at Ophelia. He stood up and approached her. Let me approve it. I think you're in charge of the deal with the dungeon market too, right? Sorry, she replied, narrowing her eyebrows. Since she was sincerely sorry, she couldn't even smile. He smiled at her. Although he really wanted to take a break at the moment, he gave it up. Okay, let me access the virtual space right now. But I also have something to order you. He grabbed Ophelia's hand, then led her to the bed so she could sit on it. Now, take some rest. Sleep first, and take care of other stuff after you wake up. Ophelia couldn't answer right away because she felt like she would collapse on the bed when she was just sitting there. Well, I think I have to greet you when you come back. Just go to sleep, lady. Yong-ho slightly winked at her and sat on a throne in one side of the Demon King's room. Lucia, get ready for me to access the virtual space. Okay, master. Die. And just a moment ago my heart was pounding. Lucia giggled brightly. Yong-ho, who completely forgot Lucia was watching him all along, tried to calm down. Before accessing it, he saw Catalina for the last time. I will be back. I'll wait. Catalina's tail flapped. Yong-ho closed his eyes comfortably. He accessed the virtual space of the dungeon market. It was the first time that Yong-ho accessed the virtual space of the dungeon market in a place other than the House of Mammon. He opened his eyes in a strange atmosphere. It was quiet, and there was nothing. He just blinked in a white space. It was a very familiar space, but he had never encountered anything like this. Sitli. There was no answer from her. He looked around in a little anxiety. Was this such a terrible place? The pure white horizon, which was just connected endlessly without even its shadow, was terrifying. What the hell happened? He tried calling her once again. Sitri recognition number 09, assistant of the man. Yong-ho Chun, the current master of the House of Mammon. Your recognition has been completed. Welcome. When the letters of light spread out in front of his eyes, he could hear the slightly stiff voice of a woman. Her voice was suddenly heard, but since he was familiar with it, he was rather relieved. It was a standard voice that could be heard everywhere, such as when they introduced the catalogue of the dungeon merchant. The voice continued. Sitri is currently attending the Dungeon Chamber of Commerce. You can't chat with Sitri now. Would you like to go back? Or would you like to trade in normal mode? Yong-ho knitted his eyes slightly. Maybe he was overconfident, but it was Sitri's way of dealing with him. The Sitri that he used to be familiar with would have conveyed a direct message to him instead of relaying her message through a machine. Is she attending an emergency meeting? He became curious. Sitri always described herself as a big shot in the dungeon market, and her statement wasn't a lie. She was a powerful witch that had lived for over 1,000 years. If it was an emergency meeting in which Sitri had to attend, the agenda was highly likely to be unusual. I wonder if it's related to embryo. He momentarily questioned it, but he soon shook his head. There was zero possibility that the emergency meeting was about it. It was highly likely that it was a much bigger agenda at the meeting. Looking at the letters of light, Yong-ho asked, "Can't I wait here until Sitri returns?" You can, Tai. However, I can't tell you exactly how long you have to wait until she comes back. How long has it been since the meeting started? I can't answer that question. In a way, it was a natural answer. Instead of asking more, Yong-ho moved his fingers. Although he couldn't see Sitri at the moment, the whole white space made him adjust to the situation. A chair that looked very fluffy rose behind his back. Let me wait here. Can I browse the catalogue of the dungeon market? Sure you can. I hope you have a great time. The letters of light disappeared, and, as if it could be a substitute, a round sphere of light was formed around his left hand. Buried deep in the white chair, he gently touched the sphere of light. Then, a familiar catalogue of the dungeon market opened in the air. The reason he chose to wait wasn't just because he was curious about the results of the meeting that Sitri attended. He needed a direct deal with her. Since he wanted to pay with the bones of the bone dragon for the delivery service, it was absolutely necessary for him to negotiate with her about the price. Good. He decided to relax. Being connected to the virtual space itself consumed mana, but now he had 5 horns. The amount of mana recovered naturally was more than that consumed in the virtual space. If he could stop being impatient, he could have a pleasant break. What a big catalogue. It was different from the limited catalogue that Citri had shown to him so far. The general catalogue of the dungeon market boasted of very detailed items because of the vast variety of its trading items. Yong-ho first typed Bone Dragon on the search bar. Soon, the complicated stuff on the screen disappeared and a concise sentence appeared on it. Chapter 1-6. Homecoming 3 Catalogue of 6-Star Dungeon Spirit. Most items can be bought here. If you want to buy them, please consult with the person in charge. Until now, the dungeon spirits Yong-ho dealt with were those with 3 stars at most. 6-star dungeon spirit. He admired it unwittingly. Without Scathach's force of life, he would never have beaten the Bone Dragon. I see he now understood why it was so strong. At the same time, he had some doubts. How did Embryo get the Bone Dragon? The price of the Bone Dragon was astronomical. Since he developed a gold mine, Yong-ho could make a lot of money. But that wasn't enough. Of course, Embryo must have been richer than Yong-ho himself. Still, it seemed difficult for Embryo to buy the Bone Dragon. Yong-ho thought, first of all, its price was too expensive, but there was another essential problem here. In other words, the Bone Dragon wasn't a dungeon spirit that he could get with money alone. Yong-ho closed his eyes gently. There were a few things that came to his mind, but instead of jumping to conclusions, he decided to sleep on it for now. He needed some more information about Embryo. Let me take care of what I can do now. After opening his eyes, Yong-ho looked for things he could do with the bones of the Bone Dragon. Things he imagined were laid before his eyes. Various weapons made from dragon bones. A smile came to his lips naturally. He wasn't sure if Bergrim could smelt the dragon's bones, but if Bergrim could, it would be a jackpot for Yong-ho because he could have a whole dragon's bones dozens of meters long. Overly excited at the prospect, Yong-ho checked the price of weapons made from dragon bones. Once again, he smiled happily. I think I will make a lot of money by trading the dragon bones. He seemed to know why Ophelia was so anxious. It was natural for her to get nervous when she saw such a trove of gold was being neglected on the street. Yong-ho gulped and browsed the catalogue again because something came to his mind suddenly. Got it! 4-star dungeon spirit. Dragon soldier. Skeleton born from dragons. Bones from dragon's bones. As a material, it boasts of much stronger defensive power than an ordinary skeleton. So depending on the type and age of the source dragon, its properties and strength are different. Yong-ho fidgeted with his fingers in a row. This time, he looked for the menu items on the scroll item, not dungeon spirits. Scroll of Dragon Soldier Creation. Dragon bones needed. It is recommended to purchase dragon bones together. Fortunately, it existed. Yong-ho breathed a breath of relief. Although the House of Mammon had a good wizard like Tigrius, he was a novice in terms of necromancing. So, Yong-ho thought of filling Skull's unit with dragon soldiers. He thought of one more. He felt really empowered, imagining that Skull would be reborn as a bone dragon. He felt satisfied, as if his belly was full without eating anything. While fighting Embryo, he realized very clearly that the battle in the demon world was different from that in the human world. The combat power of each dungeon spirit was truly superhuman, so it was possible to overshadow numerical superiority by qualitative strength. Initially, Yong-ho reluctantly chose the elite soldiers under the inevitable circumstances, but he had a vision. It was better for him to produce 10 elite soldiers at the cost of producing 1,000 troops with poor armament and combat power. It was a difficult task for ordinary masters of houses, but Yong-ho himself had the power of evolution, and he could make it. After googling on the Bone Dragon and dragon soldiers, Yong-ho checked the dungeon spirits, feeling more relaxed. He didn't check them out for purchase or window shopping. He examined the genealogy of high-class dragon soldiers one by one. Let me buy them low and grow them for battle. What he paid special attention to was the top-level class. They were clearly different from the class of flames that he came across accidentally. Ifrit, the crown of flames in the shape of a beautiful woman. Wikantra, the crown of the land in the shape of a powerful giant. And the top-level crown with the remaining 5 attributes. Oh, Salami is also in their league. However, Salami was already too far from Ifrit. Perhaps, without repeatedly evolving itself until it became something like a dragon, it would hardly be close to a human shape. Some time passed, and it was time for Yong-ho to pile up purchase items in his head. While the letters of light were splitting in front of his eyes, a dazzling beauty appeared. "Dear client, thank you for waiting." Citri was there as always. After greeting Yong-ho, who stood up happily for greetings, she created a chair across him. "I had to attend a meeting because something urgent happened." She frowned slightly as if she was in trouble. Yong-ho asked carefully, "Have you solved the problem?" "No, not yet. It's just the beginning. It looks like this kind of meeting will continue for some time." Citri smiled cheerfully. After seeing her smile, he was convinced that even though Citri would give him some hints about the meeting, she wouldn't tell him what happened at the meeting or why the meeting was held. Citri changed the topic. "My dear client, what has brought you here?" She looked so beautiful when she asked him, tilting her head a bit. But even before he answered, she clapped her hands and said with a bright smile, "Oh my God, I would like to congratulate you from the bottom of my heart. The fact you are here right now means that my dear client has defeated Embryo, right?" Her statement made it clear that the agenda of the meeting wasn't Embryo's defeat. He nodded with a smile. Citri suddenly narrowed her eyes and said, "By the way, I don't think that's the only thing I want to celebrate. Any other good news?" He couldn't manage his expression. Faced with his silly expression, she pulled her body slightly back. "Well, I feel like my loyalty to my dear client has been weakened very slightly. Don't make such an expression before other ladies. That's my sincere advice." But Yong-ho couldn't help but laugh. Recalling Catalina flapping her ears, he cleared his throat once again. Changing his expression this time, he said, "I would like to trade the bones of the bone dragon." His deal with Citri was quick and cheerful, as always. So, he sold the entire left leg bone of the bone dragon. In return, he purchased the delivery service by the dungeon market, a large number of recovery items, and a scroll to create dragon soldiers. In his mind, the price of the bone dragon's bones was sold a little lower, but he didn't protest because he didn't think Citri wouldn't force him to price down the bones. As if she read his mind, she added lightly, "If you incur the wrath of the undead, the value of the dragon's bones is supposed to go down because the energy of death resides in the dragon's bones. Please keep this in mind if you are going to smelt the bones of the bone dragon." Yong-ho just laughed bitterly. The deal was all over. He enjoyed his conversation with her, but he stood up because he wanted to take a break more than anything else now. "Let me leave now. See you next time. Can I give you a piece of advice before you leave?" Citri also stood up. Getting closer to him, who was puzzled, she whispered, "If you are going to visit the house, you had better hurry up. If you delay, you might not have time to visit." He looked at her, hiding her expression. He stepped back. It was just clear that her advice was related to an emergency meeting. "I love you, client. See you next time." Bowing to him, she disappeared after winking at him. It seemed like she was asking him to find out more by himself if he was curious. It was clear that something big had happened to the demon world. Given Citri's attitude, it didn't seem like it would have a direct negative impact on him, but he had no choice but to be careful from now on. He shook his head once. He pulled himself together and closed his eyes. Then he logged out of the virtual space. Pitter-pat, pitter-pat. Lub-dub. "You can treat me as if I don't exist. I can understand." Between breakfast and lunch the next day, Yong-ho, who barely woke up from more than 10 hours of sleep, listened to Lucia half asleep. Had Catalina not woken him up, he would have slept for a few more hours. "Sorry to wake you up." "No, you don't have to. I asked you to wake me up by this time." "Thanks," smiling softly. He got up from his bed and stretched himself lightly. He stroked Catalina's head. He looked around in no time and kissed her lips lightly. He felt good but shy at the same time. Catalina raised her tail with her ears blushing. "Wow, oh my gosh. Will you really treat me like someone who really doesn't exist? I'm watching you." Letting Lucia's complaint in one ear and out the other, he pinched Catalina's cheek. He wanted to touch her more, but he didn't want to be trapped by Lucia. "Bruh." Whiny, sob. Seeing Lucia expressing onomatopoeia in a row, it seemed that Lucia was really sad or angry. Since Lucia was like his alter ego, it was natural that Lucia reacted like that. He left the room after teasing Catalina and Lucia a little more in different ways. After having a quick meal, he gathered the dungeon spirits and Rikum, the leader of defense of the House of Mammon, in one place. "You guys did a great job." He was serious. Indeed, all of them suffered so much that none were in good shape. Yong-ho looked back at Rikum, who was bandaged almost all over her body. Rikum, all the dungeon spirits who participated in the battle will receive due rewards. Thank you for surviving. The dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon were not characters in games. They were real human beings with their own lives. So, he needed to give them due rewards. Aside from his compliments, he could not get their loyalty for nothing. Tigrius, perhaps the least injured among them, said, "The delivery service team of the dungeon market has started shipping the bones of the bone dragon. You don't have to worry because they are quick and accurate." But Tigrius was also exhausted like others, because he was tasked with cleaning up after the fight for the reason he was the least wounded. Seeing him for a moment, Young Ho turned his head to the side. He noticed something unusual in Tigrius' eyes. "Do you want to say something?" Chapter 147, Homecoming 4. Instead of answering immediately, Tigrius moved his lips up and down a few times, something unusual for his typical reaction. After hesitating for a moment, Tigrius said, "I'm sorry to say this, but I would like to get some bones of the bone dragon. Just a little bit." Although he was an ascetic and perfect old gentleman, he was also a wizard. Above all, what he wanted was the bones of the bone dragon. If he wanted, he could use it not only as weapons material but also material for magic experiments or a catalyst for various powerful magic. Moreover, the bones that Yongho got this time were those of a fully grown dragon. It was natural for a wizard to covet the bones. Yongho smiled brightly at his desperate gaze. Since he became one of his dungeon spirits, Tigrius had never expressed his desire openly, so Yongho wanted to grant his request. "I can't say you can use them to your heart's content, but you can use some of them. You can trust me." "Thank you." As if he felt a bit embarrassed, Tigrius didn't hide his smile. Watching him, all of the other dungeon spirits showed approving smiles. Fighting at the risk of his life, Tigrius was already a member of the House of Mammon. Rikun said again, "I think we will be done cleaning up before dark. How about the funeral? I think we can handle their bodies here quickly and proceed with it formally after returning to the Free City. Because of the compensation for the killed, I don't think we can wrap up the matter in a hurry. The funeral was not only for the dead, but also for the living." The Free City had the largest pool of talent that was available to Yongho. Since they had a potential for the city's development, Yongho could never treat the matter lightly. Ophelia's face turned somewhat gloomy, as if she recalled Oros, the maniac commander of the Free City who lost his life to the Bone Dragon. Rickham continued to brief Yongho about the recovery status of the injured and the fatigue of the remaining troops. "Okay, let's discuss what to do next from now on. Ophelia, please go ahead first." When Yongho pointed to her, she stood up and said, after greeting him briefly, "The battle is just over, so there is a lot of speculation. I'm sorry, but I hope you can take this into account." It was unavoidable. There was clearly a limit to Ophelia's intelligence. Above all, she was exhausted at the moment. No matter how strong she was as a red demon, she couldn't heal her severe wounds right away. However, she smiled and continued, as if to reassure everyone. In this battle, more than 500 of the embryo's army, made up of about 3,000, were killed. Out of the remaining 2,500, most of them were alive and fled, except for those who were severely injured. Most of the frontline commanders also survived, so there is a possibility that they could gather the runaway soldiers to engage in military activities. But it is unlikely that they're going to be a big threat because their leader, Embryo, was dead. What she said up to this point was already discussed yesterday. Pointing to the northern and eastern parts of the southern area, she continued, "It's been a day since the battle was over, so I guess rumors are already spreading. In fact, the north is more of a problem than the ruined west, but since the north is located very far from the south and people there are faced with the army in the east, so they don't pose an immediate threat. In my opinion, they will be absorbed by the eastern army, or they will enter into a power struggle among themselves after repelling the eastern army. There were numerous geographic patterns that could not easily pass between the north and south. The reason why Embryo hit the south from the outskirts of the west was partly to block the east from outside support, but the main reason was because attacking the south right from the north was geographically difficult. The biggest problem is the people in the east. They are maintaining their troops safely at the moment, but I can say with certainty that they won't be a threat to the House of Mammon and its master. Even Ophelia herself was confident that she could defeat the head of the eastern army. The House of Mammon was strong, as evidenced in this battle. Eligos was moved to tears quietly. Catalina also suppressed her feelings by biting her lip slightly. The two dungeon spirits, who saved the House of Mammon from the verge of collapse, felt like the present situation was a dream. Since there are so many survivors, the rumors will spread specifically and widely. If the masters of houses in the east are smart enough, they won't act recklessly. Although they thought of fighting Embryo after occupying the northern area, either Embryo or the House of Mammon was much stronger than they expected. If they heard the outcome of the battle this time, it was highly likely that they would get scared and refrain from provoking. There are two options for the Eastern Army attack: the North as it is now, or go back to their homeland and preserve their power. I guess they'll attack the North. There was a real possibility that they would attack the North. They already rose up the army and needed to strengthen their army to challenge Yong-ho. Moreover, now that the power of the House of Mammon declined greatly after fighting Embryo, this was the right time for them to attack him. If they hesitated a little longer, they would have no choice but to withdraw their army even if they didn't want to. For the east, their main base would be likely occupied by the House of Mammon in the south. Ophelia nodded as if she agreed with Yong-ho's prediction. In fact, either way is good for us. If they attack the north, we can give back what they were trying to profit from us while we're fighting Embryo. Yong-ho had nothing to lose in this situation. The House of Mammon had the necessary power. Eligos, who wiped his tears off slightly with a handkerchief, asked Ophelia, "Can we expand to the west?" Unfortunately, or fortunately, there is little left for us to take in the devastated west. Luckily enough, it seems that there are some supplies left in the last city. As soon as it is known that Embryo was dead, they will be the target of looting. The west will be simply hell. Maybe sooner or later, refugees will come from the west to the south in droves. Ophelia, who responded affectionately to Eligos, turned to Yong-ho. Yong-ho nodded because he agreed with her. When she was done talking, Rickham said again, "In order to expand to the west, we need some time to heal. Sorry to say this, but we need infantry to conquer and maintain the dungeons and estates there. Although we won, the number of troops we can mobilize from the House of Mammon was greatly reduced. I recommend you focus on restoring your strength first of all." Yong-ho accepted his recommendation because he was right. After pausing for a moment, Yong-ho had everybody pay attention to him. He said in a calm voice, "I'm going to tell you about another topic." He was not going to talk about the post-battle cleanup or prediction of what was coming next. Turning his eyes away from them slightly, he said, "Embryo was definitely a strong man. He was a faithful hero who unified the North and the West in just a few months. But even so, I feel that the troops he mobilized in the battle yesterday were excessive. In particular, the Bone Dragon. Are you saying that somebody is behind Embryo?" Tigrius asked. Yong-ho nodded at his sharp question. "I think that's very likely. If someone is really behind his back, he must be extraordinary. Apart from the Death Knight, the Bone Dragon is really in a different league. At least in the southern area, there were none who could possess a Bone Dragon. Money wasn't the problem. Top-class dungeon masters could not be bought with money alone. Moreover, the Bone Dragon that Yong-ho defeated this time was not included in the catalogue of the dungeon market. If so, it was the Bone Dragon that the dungeon market created secretly, or one created independently by an individual or a group without the help of the dungeon market. Either way, its scale was too big. Even considering the whole land of the demon world, not just the southern area, there were not many who could create a Bone Dragon. From now on, I want to make a little assumption. You can take it far-fetched, so take that into account when you listen." Not only Tigrius, but also Ophelia made a subtle expression. Clearing his throat once, he said, "Embryo acted strangely before he died. Instead of attacking me with his full might, Embryo chose to protect me." "Protected you?" Ophelia asked suddenly. Since she didn't hear it yesterday, she was obviously embarrassed to hear it. "The black demon that thrust through the ground tried to ambush me. I was so exhausted and focused on Embryo then that I didn't notice it, but Embryo killed the guy. He killed it by using an enormous amount of magic, as if he expected its attack in advance." Yong-ho couldn't take the essence of Embryo and the black demon, because the last magic used by Embryo completely destroyed the essence of both. It didn't seem like he improvised this kind of magic hastily. Maybe it was magic that he had prepared only to defeat the black demon, because he never used it while fighting Yong-ho, who had magic as powerful as that. He left me a strange will. Hide your greed. Beware of the 6 kings, especially the king of gluttony. Having said that, Yong-ho waited for a moment. Rikum and Tigrius sprang to their feet almost simultaneously. Really? It was not because Embryo left a will that they were astonished. They were more worried about some facts contained in the will. Yes, Rikum, I am the king of greed with the sin of greed. Yong-ho admitted it. Looking back at Tigrius, who was making an astonished expression, he raised his right hand and said, "And this is Aemon, the magic spear of the Red Lotus." The flames rose. They saw it many times, but it was still very fresh to Rikum and Tigrius. That was true. It wasn't something like the flames of the Demon King. Yong-ho's magic up to now was not dependent on artifacts. The return of the King of Greed, Aemon, the magic spear of the Red Lotus that guards him at hand, and the legendary-like beings in the demon world. Tigrius felt calm amid the confusing situation, for only now could he understand it. The miraculous actions that Yong-ho showed him so far were far from those by an inexperienced and young demon king. He was the true king of the south that finally returned. Grabbing Aemon again, Yong-ho waited until Rikum and Tigrius sat down. Then he said in a low voice, "Embryo told me to hide the fact that the king of greed appeared, and he warned me to be wary of the king of gluttony among the 6 kings. So I've guessed in reverse from here." Chapter 18, Homecoming 5. Yong-ho put several pebbles on top of the entire map of the southern area. They pointed to Yong-ho himself, Embryo, the king of gluttony, and the black demon, respectively. The mastermind of Embryo is the king of gluttony, and the black demon is his minion, that he placed to monitor or help Embryo monitor him. If they had a cooperative relationship, it's illogical that Embryo killed the black demon. So I think Embryo and the king of gluttony maintained the type of relationship that helped them use each other, not a master-servant relationship. Tigrius nodded and said, "Assuming that the king of gluttony coveted the southern area, that makes sense. If Embryo tried to use the king of gluttony as you said, he might have plotted to revolt deep down. It was also possible that the king of gluttony tried to use a surrogate called Embryo instead of directly confronting Yong-ho. It's not just because of the barren environment that the southern area had been abandoned. It's because nobody wanted any of the 6 kings to take possession of the southern land, the birthplace of Mammon, the great king of greed." According to his logic, the king of gluttony used the surrogate to unify the southern area and ruled it behind the scenes. If so, what you have just said means that Embryo betrayed the king of gluttony at the last minute. Not only did he save you by killing the Watcher, but also it warned you against the king of gluttony, said Tigrius. Yong-ho nodded at Tigrius' assumption. Catalina, who was silent until now, narrowed her eyebrows and asked, "Did Embryo hate the king of gluttony so much?" Based on his explanation, Embryo took the last step of interfering with the king of gluttony's scheme instead of dealing a fatal blow to Yong-ho, who killed him. At first glance, Embryo's action could not be understood. Maybe he projected himself onto you, Master, or he might have changed his mind just before dying. Yong-ho nodded at Ophelia's analysis. Actually, he also thought of it too. He said, "There are too many assumptions here from the beginning. I don't think it's a good idea to jump to any conclusion before we gather more information about Embryo's intention. I would like to pay more attention to the king of gluttony." Ophelia said, "First of all, I think it's better for you to keep hiding the power of greed, as Embryo said. The other kings will not stand still when they hear the 7th king of greed has returned." Tigrius said this time, "I also agree with Ophelia. If you think about it carefully, the king of gluttony seems to have the biggest headache. His territory borders the northeast of the southern area. Moreover, if he had been really behind Embryo, he would have amassed enormous intelligence compared with other kings. In the extreme situation, they could mobilize their troops for the simple fact that you defeated Embryo and the Bone Dragon. They might move their troops directly because of their wariness of other kings. But it's possible that they can send their minions to gather intelligence about us. That's why I'm thinking of choosing to build up our strength in the south rather than expanding into the west immediately. In that case, we can leave the north and the east as they are," Yong-ho responded. Actually, he didn't need to hurry. What he needed now was not an external expansion. The dungeon spirits of the House of Mammon, who knew the truth of the labyrinth of greed, understood his intention. His priority was to attack the labyrinth of greed and complete his godly energy. Eligos recalled the arena more than anything else. If Yong-ho controlled the arena and obtained all of the dungeon spirits there, including Gusion, he would not need to fear anything, even if his rival were the king of gluttony. He could deal with the king easily. When Catalina, Eligos, Skull, and Ophelia, who could be called his original dungeon spirits, exchanged meaningful glances with each other, Tigrius felt a strange sense of alienation, but he remained silent. As he did today, he believed that one day he would hear from Yong-ho about it directly. When they almost wrapped up their conversation, Yong-ho brought out the last topic. Ophelia. Collect intelligence about the northern part of the demon world. Are you talking about the northern part of the demon world, the territory of the King of Pride? If the southern area was at the southern end of the demon world, the King of Pride's territory was located at the northern end. Since both territories were at the opposite end, they were too far from each other. But Yong-ho had a good reason to ask Ophelia for it. When I accessed the virtual space of the dungeon market yesterday, Citri was attending an emergency meeting, and she said to me, "If you don't do it now, you won't have any time to visit home." No way. She may have said it simply because of the southern area, but I don't think that's all. It is possible that the fight between the King of Pride and the King of Envy has escalated more than they expected. In fact, Yong-ho had never been outside the south, let alone the southern area itself. However, he could easily guess that the fight between two kings would have a great influence on the entire demon world. It was just like the fighting between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War era. If that's true, it's a grave situation, Tigrius moaned. If something went wrong, the whole demon world would be engulfed in the flames of war. While everyone was in a serious mood, Catalina curled her lips again. After hesitating for a moment, she asked carefully, "Master, aren't you planning to visit the human world?" "Well, very briefly. Aside from my homesickness, I have to." The door of space was already completed. Moreover, he felt this was the only opportunity to visit his hometown, as Citri said. If he dragged his feet a little longer, he would not be able to leave this place because of the King of Gluttony, as well as his concern about the northern and the eastern parts. Yong-ho turned to Eligos and said, "How often do I have to visit? You have become so strong, compared with when you just came to the throne of the master of the House of Mammon. If you visit this time, you will have no problems for at least hundreds of years." Yong-ho was already a powerful existence that was half a human and half a demon. To describe him, he could be called a hybrid demon like Catalina. In the case of Bergrim or Azran, a hero of the alien world who he had seen at the auction house of the dungeon market, they didn't need to regularly visit their hometowns even though they were from the alien world. It was because, unlike Yong-ho, they were already familiar with mana before they came to the demon world. "Okay, I think I have to visit my hometown quickly." He didn't intend to stay long. Maybe for 2 to 3 days, he wanted to say hi to his parents and reassure them about his safety, then return quickly. At that moment, he suddenly laughed playfully because of Catalina's expression, who was standing behind his back. "Why? Will you miss me even if I am absent for a few days?" Only now could they confirm each other's affection. Definitely, she would miss him. However, she couldn't even say yes immediately. When she blushed without answering, he took her hand and said, "You don't have to be disappointed because I'm going with you." Astonished, she blinked, and Eligos and Ophelia, who had already talked about it, exchanged meaningful glances. And Salami, waiting outside the door in the hallway, shook its head and clicked its tongue. Any dungeon spirit will do. How about Ophelia, Eligos, Tigrius, or Skull, except for Catalina? In terms of camouflage, I think Tigrius is the best. Late at night, Lucia urgently made an offer to Yong-ho, who just returned from the House of Mammon quickly. He needed to have one dungeon spirit accompanying him on his visit to his hometown. The dungeon spirit was supposed to escort him, but would also assist him by using the magic for his return to the demon world. Yong-ho, a human being, was like a sign in the human world. Because of him, they could stably create the coordinate of the door of space leading to the human world. That was why he needed its opposite. If someone in the demon world directly connected to Yong-ho closely accompanied him, it would be possible to obtain more stably the door of space leading to the demon world than he himself passed it alone. So Yong-ho chose Catalina. Besides, she was his escort knight. In all respects, she was the right candidate. But Lucia didn't seem to think so. Master, you're so mean. If you cross into the human world, I can't watch or protect you. How could Lucia watch or protect him? So, he quickly ignored her suggestion this time. He picked up the communications gear and talked to Ophelia, who remained in the House of Randalt. I will restore the power of the House of Mammon as much as possible during your absence. Don't worry about the situation here. Have a safe and pleasant trip. Yong-ho also replied shortly, because the device could only convey short messages. Okay, I hope him in your good hands. I, Indirian's daughter Ophelia, will try to meet your expectations. His communication with Ophelia was cut off. He looked back at the dungeon spirits who came out to see him off. Master, have a great trip. Uriah, already the cutie of the House of Mammon, said goodbye to him on behalf of them. She was really cute when she slightly bowed to lift her skirt. He stroked her head gently. Let me buy you a present. Have you heard about chicken? Chicken. Yes, trust me. It's incredibly delicious. It is also a symbol of world peace. If I can, I'll bring Coke, too. Uriah's eyes twinkled at his grand explanation. Baduk, who was next to him, drooled at the name of the food. As a result of repeated evolution, Baduk turned into a reliable creature, but it was still a simple animal. After exchanging his gaze with Salami lastly, he stood at the door of space. Just like he did when he first met her, he gently grabbed Catalina's hand, who was dressed in a suit. Please have a great trip. To please say hello to your father. This time, Yong-ho didn't ignore Lucia's words. After greeting her, he turned to Catalina. Shall we go? I, escort knight Catalina, will risk my life to protect you, master. Although she said it gravely, her ears and tail flapped. How would his father react when he saw this escort knight? Lucia activated the door of space. Almost all of the mana produced daily by the House of Mammon was put into the door of space. As it was not sufficient, about half of the mana she accumulated for the past few days was exhausted. Mana swirled inside the empty circular frame of the door of space, creating a plate of blue mana that moved like a wave. There was a road that led to the human world over there. Yong-ho didn't leave for the human world for good. It would be his brief visit. Nonetheless, his heart was pounding. He stepped forward and threw himself into the door of space with Catalina. Chapter 109. Mammon's Legacy 1. This time, he felt different when he accessed the virtual space of the dungeon market. This time, he felt somewhat different when he passed through the secret passage to the arena. The feeling when the water of Skathak's life covered his whole body. The moment he felt it, he lost consciousness. When he opened his eyes again, completely different senses dominated his whole body. Time has passed, he could recognize it. He only closed and opened his eyes, but there was definitely something in between. Yong-ho breathed. He quickly regained the sensation of his whole body. He felt the warmth and softness at his fingertips. Regardless of who was the first, Yong-ho raised his upper body almost at the same time as Catalina. Sitting down, they looked back, as if they promised to do so. Their mana was swirling. It looked like he was seeing the distortion created inside the dungeon. The twist that sprinkled a brilliant light naturally became smaller and fixed at the size of a small tennis ball. Only then could Yong-ho afford to look around. He opened his mouth wide open. It was foreign and familiar to him. It was strangely unfamiliar to him because almost all of the large furniture, such as the bed and desk, disappeared. But it was definitely Yong-ho's own room. The wallpaper and ceiling he was used to seeing for the past 10 years proved that it was his room. He was back. This was Earth, the human world. Perhaps, since he realized he was back to his home, he felt that even the air was different. He could hardly see the flow of the demon world, which he always saw in the demon world by concentrating his consciousness. In fact, he was freed from the demon world now. It's my home, he said. Catalina looked around, flapping her ears slightly. When she first took him, she couldn't afford to look around because she took him only in haste. He couldn't pay much attention to her. He suddenly rose from his seat and shouted again. My home. The smell of the room he missed so much tickled his nose. In fact, There was nothing special that he could smell in the room, but he was touched anyway. He quickly opened the door and shouted instinctively, "Dad's son is back, Dad." But he heard no answer from his father. There was no one in the living room. Catalina said cautiously, "There seems to be no one in this house right now." Actually, she was much better at sensing human presence than him. He nodded. Come to think of it, it was natural there was nobody at home at this time. I think Daddy went to our chicken house, our family business. Moreover, when Catalina and Eligos kidnapped him, they did something else. They said they left a letter he prepared carefully in the human world. Of course, it was a letter with translation magic, so the people in the human world could understand it even if they didn't know the language of the demon world. Since your son has the talent of a demon king, we are inviting him as the master of the House of Mammon. That was what was written in the letter, according to Eligos and Catalina. If the letter had been found in another house, his father might have suspected that his son, who was in delusion, left a strange letter before leaving the house, but Young Ho's house was special. Maybe his father might have been happy to learn that his son finally carried out his determination. My father might have thought so. His father might have even thought that it should be him, not his son, that Eligos and Catalina should have taken. Thinking about his father, Young Ho calmed down. Although he was still excited, he could think about lots of other things. He looked at Catalina. She was good. Her ears and tails flapped vigorously. Good. After checking something out, which Catalina could not understand, Young Ho looked back at himself. He first checked what he brought with him from the demon world. His suit as the Demon King, reminiscent of a semi-suit, was neat. The magic field on his left arm was also kept well in the form of gloves, and the flame bracelet, another form of Ammon, was kept in good shape. He injected a little mana into Ammon. As if to respond, there was a faint green flame around the bracelet. He could feel Ammon. Next, he opened the leather pocket on his waist. It was barely the size of a fist, but what was inside was special. It was full of items that seemed expensive at the first glance. It was the human world without the dungeon market. Although he was going to stay here for a few days, he didn't want to be financially pinched as the Demon King. Besides, he wanted to make fortune for his father. If he could have his way, he wanted to bring much more than now. However, since he spent so much money for the fight against Embryo, there weren't many cash assets he could bring immediately. How fortunate! Not only Catalina and Eligos, but also Ophelia did not know well about the movement between the two different worlds through the door of space. Even wizard Tigrius and Bergrim, who experienced moving between the two different worlds, knew little about this field. What Young Ho knew for sure was that all kinds of electronic devices, such as a computer and cell phone that he carried with him when he was first taken to the demon world, were destroyed. Besides, those with a fairly complex internal structure among the items in the desk drawer were ruined without exception. On the other hand, the clothes Young Ho himself wore were intact. As a result, he took the gold and silver jewels under the assumption that those with simple structure would be okay. Fortunately, his prediction was correct. After breathing a sigh of relief, Young Ho looked back at the place where the twist of mana happened. He recalled something that came to his mind when he witnessed the gentle spreading of mana that leaked out like reverberation. By the way, Catalina. Yes, master. What were you going to do about me in the first place? Pardon. He slightly scratched the back of his neck. He didn't intend to question her about his kidnapping now. After experiencing the movement between the two worlds, however, he wanted to ask her. Moving between the two worlds wasn't far from normal. The amount of mana spent making the door of space was truly enormous. It might sound ridiculous, but Young Ho himself made rapid growth beyond everyone's expectations. There was a reason why Tigrius called him a man with a miraculous growth after seeing him. That was why he could create the door of space. But what would have happened if Young Ho himself did not have the sin of greed? Could he have achieved the same growth as now? It was questionable whether he could have managed to move between the two worlds even if he had not been defeated by the master of a house like Porus. The reason he came to the human world now was because he needed to visit once. Of course, he didn't have to come now. Eligos explained why Young Ho should visit the human world. According to him, since Young Ho was from the human world, he needed to be exposed to the atmosphere of the human world on a regular basis. Otherwise, his power could be weakened. However, to examine his explanation a little further, it was somewhat different from what Yong-ho first thought. In fact, anyone didn't have to visit the human world by all means just because he was from it. Those who could handle mana from the time they first entered the demon world actually did not have to visit the human world. Yong-ho himself was now a very powerful demon king. Despite that, however, he needed to visit the human world once. It was because his mana was weak when he moved from the human world to the demon world, and his ability to control mana was also poor. In other words, regardless of how strong he became after entering the demon world, the amount of mana and his ability to control it at the time of moving between the two worlds determined the frequency or necessity of his revisiting. It was a rather strange phenomenon. It seemed more like an artificial concept of permission rather than a natural phenomenon. It was like the situation where the length of one's stay in a foreign country differed, depending on what kind of visa one received when receiving one's entry or exit. Sir, it seems that there is an alien world with no restrictions like this. In any case, it was true that Yong-ho needed to visit his hometown once, and after this visit, he wouldn't have to revisit the human world for the next hundreds of years. Maybe the time limit itself would disappear because Yong-ho himself became that much stronger. However, Yong-ho was still in doubt when he recalled his first kidnapping. In what way did Catalina and Eligos think about having Yong-ho go back home? The two didn't even know that Yong-ho himself had the sin of greed, and they didn't expect he would make such a rapid growth. Did they take him to the demon world without any plan just because they wanted to satisfy their pressing needs? Besides, Yong-ho had one more question. Eligos clearly said that he would use all of the remaining mana of the House of Mammon to open the door of space. When he experienced it, however, he wondered if it was possible. The House of Mammon at the time was really on the verge of ruin. They might have had a very small amount of mana by then. Until now, Yong-ho deliberately held the urge to ask this kind of question, but he had no other choice but to ask now. When Yong-ho narrated his questions one by one, Catalina curled her lips. After her ears drooped several times, she looked at his face and said very carefully, "There was a scroll." Scroll. Yes, it was one of the few legacies that had been inherited to the House of Mammon without being lost. I and the butler collected mana to operate the scroll. Generally speaking, the magic of an ordinary scroll was supposed to be triggered by mana built into the scroll itself. However, since she mentioned she needed to get more mana, the scroll certainly didn't seem to be an ordinary one. How many scrolls were there at the time? Well, just one. Still, it was useful. When I opened the door of space with this scroll, I could engrave a magic circle in the room of the Demon King. So, I thought I could open it again at least once with the help of the famous wizard or the dungeon market, or make the door of space like now. It was what Yong-ho thought it was. Instead of getting angry, he pinched Catalina's cheeks painfully. He felt upset that she called him without any contingency plan. But she and Eligos were so desperate at that time. Regardless of the process, however, Yong-ho chose the path to become the master of the Mammon house. When she looked like she was going to cry, feeling sorry, he found her long face so cute that he could not let go of her hand easily. He felt like he learned something dangerous, just like when he first touched her tail. Let me ask you one more. How did you find me? At first, he didn't pay much attention to it, but he felt it was a little weird when he thought about this. He couldn't even understand why he had not been curious until now. Gently rubbing her red cheeks, Catalina replied, "Well, the scroll itself was not intended to open the door of space, but find and bring someone suitable for the master of the Mammon house. 2 candidates from the Mammon house were identified by the scroll, but only you had the ability to become the master. The other one was my father." "Yeah, perhaps the person that the scroll found was you. It seemed that your father was spotted because he was near you. I can confess it to you only now, but little did I think I was connected to the human world like this, I see." Yong-ho roughly understood the whole situation, but other questions came to his mind. Why did Mammon come to this place, Yong-ho's own hometown? And what was the difference between the human world and other alien worlds, such as Bergrim or Baphomet's hometown? Chapter 150, Mammon's Legacy 2. They bought and sold beings in the alien world at the dungeon market. If so, did they deliberately open the door of space and go to the alien world to search for beings to take as slaves? Or did they go on a slave hunt whenever the twists leading to the alien world by chance opened up? Yong-ho got curious about this question, but got it out of his head for now. He could get the detained answer if he could go back and ask Tigrius or Citri, or even Skathak. But not now. Citri wouldn't have said that for no reason. When he told Citri he was rebuilding the door of space, she said it would never be easy. The former Citri would not have said so simply because supplying mana was difficult. Obviously, there was something else that Yong-ho himself did not know yet. When he was lost in thought, Catalina hesitantly asked, Master. She seemed worried that he might be angry a lot. However, he stroked her hair and said with a cheerful smile, All right, I'm home anyway. Let's enjoy our stay here until we go back to the demon world. He was serious. After checking the scroll with the seal of the dungeon market, he reached out and closed the door completely. When returning, all he had to do was to make a little gap by tearing the scroll in the place where the door of space was opened, then send a signal to the House of Mammon. Then, the House of Mammon that received the signal was supposed to open the door of a new space by using Catalina as a coordinate. The duration of his stay in the human world was about 2 days based on the demon world. Accordingly, he first needed to find out about the time difference between the two worlds. He would compare the time spent in the demon world with the time that passed here. He first headed to the window. He pulled out the blinds and looked out the window. Wow! He admired what he saw outside, and Catalina opened her eyes wide at the scene that she saw for the first time. Big snowflakes were falling down from the sky on a dark winter night. Let me compare it thoroughly, but it's almost the same. He didn't simply compare it by the change of seasons. There were so many red things outside the window in addition to snow. Given that the church not far from his house was decorated with Christmas trees, it seemed to be around the end of the year. It was perhaps just before or after Christmas. Then what should he do now? Should he wait, sitting down in his room, until his father came back? Since he was not alone in the room, he could do something attractive to her, but he couldn't. He headed to the living room, then stood there looking at a small bulletin board in the living room. Oh, is this the rumored warning letter from the school? At the left corner of the bulletin board, there was a warning letter issued by the university. Since he got F in all subjects, it was natural that he got the letter, but he wasn't afraid at all because he planned to drop out anyway. He was no longer a freshman of an engineering college, but the master of the Mammon House as well as the king of greed. Nodding bravely, he turned his gaze to the side again. This time, he instinctively flinched before he knew it. You're all right. It was the same as the warning letter, but it had nothing to do with his own life. He deliberately ignored the physical examination notice stamped by the Ministry of Defense, and he quickly looked at the bulletin board. Since there was nothing special, he reached out to Catalina, who fluttered her tail and looked around. Catalina, let's go to see my father. Oh no, let's go and eat chicken. Just like Urea did, Catalina tilted her head at the word chicken, but only for a moment. After tearing the disguise magic scroll that Tigrius had prepared for her in advance, she hid her ears and tail and held his hand. Then both of them went out in a pleasant mood. As soon as he left the front door, Yong-ho had no choice but to go back home. Unlike the warm southern area in the demon world, he felt so cold on a night in Seoul where big snowflakes were falling down. He took out a long parka and mountaineering clothes called a windbreaker from the closet. After thinking hard for a moment, he handed the parka to Catalina because he felt it would make her warm enough. To his slight disappointment, she did not show any particular interest in the elevator. In a way, her reaction was nothing unusual because there were quite a few things like boxes that moved automatically in the demon world. Rather, she showed more interest in the snow falling down from the sky. Ever since she was born, she had never left the southern area, so she grew up without seeing snow at all. He cautiously reached out when he watched her ears flinching. Instead of fluttering, he touched the space where her ears were supposed to be in place. But he actually touched her real ears, for Tigrius magic did not transform her ears. It just simply concealed them. Startled, she flinched, but he instinctively moved his fingers. Without bothering to read her mana, he touched her erected tail. His erotic feelings were revived this time too. Her touch was sensual enough to make him addicted to it. No, this is not important. He asked her if she could wrap her tail around her waist or put it inside the padding. As things stood now, passers-by could hit her tail. Catalina initially urged him not to play a prank on her, but she nodded awkwardly anyway. As he passed by the door of his apartment unit, Cold air blew over his cheeks. He looked around, breathing in cold air. White snow covered the whole world. It was such a contrast with the black sky, but he didn't feel they didn't cancel out each other. The night gently wrapped the white snow, and the white snow gave the night warmth. Christmas decorations on the flower beds of his apartment created a more colorful scene. Until last year, he complained about such decorations. But this time, he felt different. The world looks so beautiful to him. I feel really warm out here. With his hands in his pockets, he made a gap inside it by slightly raising his left arm. Then he signaled to her with his eyes. She curled her lips, then crossed his arms. As Christmas had yet to come, Christmas carols were playing everywhere. There were quite a lot of people on the street. Although the streets were wide, everything was densely located. Compared to the southern area, she might have lots of curiosity here. Instead of looking around her, however, she leaned slightly to him and looked up at the stars in the night sky. He was also in a strange mood. It wasn't just because she was next to him. He came back to Earth, the human world. Just a few days ago, he was engaged in a life-threatening battle with Embryo, but now he was in peace. But he didn't want to stay in peace forever. He felt that the place he had to return to was not here, but to the house of Mammon. He walked on the street slowly. Instead of looking around like her, he focused on himself. But that didn't mean that he was insensitive to people around him. Passers-by were looking at them from all directions. Some of them stopped walking and turned to him and Catalina, and others even took pictures with smartphones. Catalina, who had a sharper sense than him, could not miss it. She whispered to him, "Master, their intense gaze at us is not very good. Did they find out my identity?" Obviously, her voice was rather sharp than nervous. Although he used to tease her with a soft touch, she was his escort knight. She could overpower these passers-by easily if she had to defend him, but he gently tapped her on the forehead and said, "It's all right. They're not looking at you for that reason, so just never mind." She tilted her head with a puzzled expression but listened to him. He rather enjoyed their intense gaze and various feelings in it and stepped forward. Among them were some women who were turning their eyes at him, not her. He took great delight in it. "Well, I'm more handsome and cool now. My body is in better shape, too." He was praising himself deep down when he suddenly stopped and smiled in satisfaction, looking at a store at a distance. It was a store decorated with wood. Inside, the glass wall was full of customers who enjoyed chicken and beer. It seemed as if he could hear their chattering from the chicken house. He wasn't moved to tears when he entered his room, but this time he suddenly shed tears before he knew it. Rolling his eyes, he looked at somebody busily moving among the customers. "Let's go." He couldn't wait any longer. Folding his arms, he walked with big strides. The store door opened with a jingling sound. "Daddy," he said briefly. The middle-aged man who turned to him after hearing the jingling bell faced him and stopped moving. Shortly afterward, he opened his mouth again. Sun Yong-ho and the middle-aged man, Ki-Cheon, stepped forward toward each other at the same time. "Daddy." Yong-ho opened his arms to give him an emotional hug. His father hugged him tightly. After tapping him on the back a couple of times, he looked back at his face. He said with a smile, "Welcome back. Let's share our dramatic reunion after the shop is closed. Delivery has been backed up. As you know, it's the busiest season of the year." Yong-ho just blinked at his thrilled voice. He could not believe his ears. 2 chicken orders in World Park Complex. 6. I put the delivery address on the paper bag. When he came to his senses, he was already outside the store. He found himself holding a paper bag with chicken in each hand. Yong-ho looked back again. His father wasn't looking at him. Master Catalina, who couldn't even enter the store at all, spoke in an embarrassed voice. Looking at her briefly, he laughed. He laughed heartily. "Yeah, here's my daddy, master. This is normal in my house. It is right for us to share the joy of our touching reunion after business hours." Yong-ho felt a bit sorry for his father's way of welcoming him back when he returned home in several months, but he felt reassured at the same time. Obviously, his father understood his long absence from home well. Come to think of it, I wonder if he intentionally posted the warning letter from the university and the physical examination notice on the bulletin board. Did he do it to tease him as soon as his son came back? Again, such action befitted his father. That was why Yong-ho happily climbed onto the delivery motorcycle. Moreover, I wasn't alone here today. Sitting behind his back, Catalina naturally hugged his waist.